The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 21. Wisdom. Melted mozzarella. Not for the first time in his life, Severus had a migraine. It was sitting over his right eye as though it had been nailed there by some invisible force. He should have gotten used to it by now, after so many years of being tormented. After all, it was only fair that constant stress should have some minor impact on his health. The side effects of living a life of deceit, perhaps, or simply his mother's defective genes. Clutching at the armchair's cushion, he silently wondered how it was even possible for plain physical agony to be so intense. This was no external crisis, no blow on the head or a curse that hit him. No, this pain, he felt, was born inside his head by him and for him only. It was exclusively his own twisted creation. He never imagined that such torture could be endured, and yet here he was, both conscious and in the middle of the splitting torture. The invisible wire around his skull was closing in with faint cracking noises. How much farther could it shrink? Ever since he'd used the last painkiller, he hadn't found the time to brew more. Foolish to think that one could live with a Potter without needing painkillers. He cracked his neck, wishing for death. His death, Voldemort's death, Dumbledore's. Making a mental note of all the deaths he should take care of, he pushed the thought aside and coughed hard. "Are you all right?" Potter was sitting on the sofa, one leg up at the table. Filthy brat. Was he all right? When Dumbledore offered him a chance to repent, he did it with no desire to ever meet Lily's son. "My head might just explode." For when he did meet Lily's son, the boy was Potter's son, and there was nothing lovable, nothing interesting for Severus to see. The years passed, and he didn't stop being Potter's son. His father's revolting ghost kept hovering over his head, shadowing him with his features, his cheek, his memory. "Oh, did you take a painkiller?" "I must brew one." "Oh." Such verbal fluency. Damn boy. He'd always been the center of attention, and there was not a single person in Hogwarts that could possibly be displeased by his disobedience or lack of manners, except for Severus. Severus saw what the others didn't, and as ironic as it was, now he could see again what the others had never seen. He was determined to despise the boy, to help him for Lily's sake. Liking him had not been part of the plan. Enjoying his company had not been part of the plan. Waking up with Potter curled up against his chest had certainly not been part of the plan. "You don't look like you can brew anything at the moment." "Because I can't." And responding to this urge towards familiarity was absolutely unacceptable. Not only sinful, not only depraved, but absolutely, thoroughly, downright wrong. It was the circumstances. Spending too much time with someone was bound to break the ice, and when combined with brain activities... He coughed again. His brain had no activity at the moment. "Could I brew it for you?" "No, be silent." Sharing the bed with James Potter's son. Now this was a secret he would carry to his grave. He allowed himself a moment to think of Draco and his new task. And then he decided that if his headache didn't stop within the next 10 minutes, he would throw himself onto the nearest car. "I have aspirins." Severus glared. Or he tried to. "Aspirins, you know, for headaches and such. Local medicine, but even Madame Pumphrey has it. I must have some in my trunk. I'm going to check." Right, aspirins. He was about to beg Potter to leave him alone with a good dozen of them, but the boy had already fled upstairs. When the clock read 9 and Snape had it barked from downstairs that dinner was ready, Harry descended on his own. He found Snape in the living room, exactly where he'd left him hours ago. When Harry appeared into sight, Snape was just getting up from the sofa to pick up a bottle from the table. His face was flushed and his hair damp. "Snape?" Snape looked at him startled, as if he'd never seen him before. It was a look of surprise, or maybe disbelief. "You're still here," he said. Yeah?" "I remember," he continued, sitting back down heavily. "I remember how Dumbledore was telling me about the Sodding Hat. And I thought it impossible that you'd end up in Gryffindor. You contradicted me." Harry gave him a confused look. "Excuse me?" Snape closed his eyes and frowned as though attempting hard to focus on something. "I excuse you. Leave." Harry stepped closer and placed his palm on Snape's forehead. It wasn't fever. "How much did you drink?" Ignoring his question, Snape took another gulp straight from the bottle. His chest heaved dangerously. "If you're still here, not enough." "Right," Harry said with a straight face as he snaked his hand under Snape's and snatched the bottle away. It was rather empty. Snape leaned forward to take it back, but Harry stepped away. "Harry, Give it back. You're talking nonsense, Harry muttered. Give it back, Harry, now. He still made no motion of standing. He seemed to try out the word, testing how it sounded on his tongue. Harry. 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 Harry gulped a bile of daring sentiment that was stuck in his throat. It pitifully landed between his lungs. You must stop drinking like this. You have a problem. Snape got up, coughing into his palm again. It runs in the family. Harry stood still, trying to figure out what was happening. Snape couldn't be this pissed. It had only been a couple of hours, after all. What had happened? He glanced over at the table and noticed it. The aspirin box laid open next to an empty glass and Snape's wand. You mixed aspirins with fire whiskey, didn't you? Snape shook his head. Don't worry, I won't kill myself just yet. Maybe next week, Snape said as he fumbled his way to the staircase. When he reached it, he glared upstairs as though it was the stairs' fault it had so many steps. Grunting to himself, he pressed his palm against the wall inside. Hadn't you taken aspirins before? I thought you had. Snape looked at him as if he were dumb. I'm a master potion potter, he explained. Why would I need to? Harry nodded once. Okay, yeah, we should contact Dumbledore. Snape scratched the wall in an attempt to hold himself up. Dumbledore can't do anything. Not for me, not for you. I meant, he doesn't want to. He didn't want to when he knew my father would beat the shit out of... Harry didn't want to hear that. Sir, please. Year after year he sent me back here. Wake up, Potter. He doesn't care about these things. When did he ever? He breathed deeply, trying to calm himself. Drunk, he hissed. I had my first drink when I was 12. I don't get drunk. Harry watched him as he attempted to climb up the stairs and stumbled over the first step before sitting down. That struck Snape as hilarious, for he broke into laughter, and once it began, he couldn't stop. He laughed until he was gasping for breath, shaking his head. He tried to move and stand, swaying as though trying to stop the room from spinning. He tilted violently, and he almost fell again, still grunting with laughter. I never get drunk. God, not when he... That was enough. Harry caught him, dragging him up to his feet. He placed Snape's arm around his shoulders and steadied him. Snape, are you listening? I'm not deaf. Right, come on. No, you're lying. Snape's breath smelled heavily of whiskey, and he was so close that Harry feared he might get drunk too. Lying about what? Snape just looked at him, trying hard to focus his eyes. You were there. Harry blinked. I'm taking you back to your room. Can you walk? I'm not crippled, Snape snapped defensively. Harry carried him to his bedroom carefully, Snape's moves hindering rather than helping. The shoulder that was not being supported on Harry had sagged downwards, and his weight kept slithering through Harry's grip on his arm. Snape struggled, but Harry ignored him. Easy now. Shut off. If a fully conscious and alert Snape could be bitter and stubborn, a drunk one was just impossible to get on with. Lifting Snape's arm from his shoulders, Harry turned around to steady him before helping him to the bed. It didn't work right. Snape got hold of his shoulders and lost his balance at once. Harry fell on the bed and was immediately covered by Snape's unconscious body. Not unconscious, Harry's head sagged into the pillow as he stared up at the ceiling. Snape shifted a little and stayed there. Harry's life sucked, and breathing was becoming more and more difficult as the seconds went by. A strand of dark hair fell on Harry's cheek. Was Snape even breathing? His nose was probably buried into the pillow. Snape? Snape grunted in acknowledgement. Harry placed his palms against Snape's shoulders and pushed. You're suffocating me. He pushed harder. How heavy was Snape exactly? He looked too thin to weigh that much. With another firm push, Harry rolled him over on his back and he sat back. Snape inhaled deeply, and it occurred to Harry that he hadn't been able to breathe for some time. Snape weakly tugged at his own coat's collar. Suffocating, he agreed before bursting into low laughter. Pushing his hand away, Harry undid the first buttons of his coat and inner shirt. That'll do, he said at last, but Snape had closed his eyes again. Snape? That was it, he had passed out. Harry rubbed his palms on his thighs, not knowing what to do next. Snape choked again, and Harry poked him on the head. Snape. Yes. Should I owl Dumbledore? Something was funny about this question too, as it appeared, because Snape brisked another series of coughing to express his laughter. Harry couldn't leave him like that. Sleep here again. No, Snape would be furious. This was Harry's fault. You should have warned him about the aspirins. maybe he should lift Snape's head a little just to make sure that he was going to be alright. Just that, and then he'd leave. Still sitting next to him, Harry leaned over Snape to get a hold of the pillow and slide it under his head. Snape showed his appreciation with a sigh of relief and nothing else. Well, he should leave. He should... Snape's eyes snapped open. Too close. He was too close. It occurred to him that he should back away, now, and yet he couldn't keep himself from staring. The black eyes, the parted lips, the tears of laughter that made the long eyelashes stick together. He stayed still as the darkness poured out of those eyes and seemed to fill the room and drown him in it. It was a wonder whether Snape could understand who he was looking at, if his eyesight was blurred or steady, but he observed Harry's face slowly, as though he had all the time in the world to do just that. Every second seemed to announce its departure with a soundless heaviness that lasted excruciatingly long. His lips could almost brush the skin. Snape raised a hand, too certain, too quietly, and placed it on the back of Harry's neck. And Harry was too startled to do anything, so he didn't shift or move or speak, and he wanted to lick his lips but didn't dare dart his tongue out just now. Then Snape grasped in fiercely as though sudden sobriety had struck him, and Harry locked his eyes with Snape's until both of them closed them together, slowly. Harry leaned down. Their lips barely met, and as Harry sampled the touch for a second, he couldn't tell if this impossible emotion inside his chest had just spurted alive, or if it was something perpetual, something that knew how to hide all along, but was achingly vital and genuine all the same. At first the brush was so soft that he thought he had imagined it. Then, once he parted his lips, Snape's tongue attacked him so deeply that Harry didn't know anymore who was breathing for whom. Snape's mouth and tongue tasted like warm honey and firewater. It wasn't exactly harsh, it was more like a whisper than a sound, more like the memory of a kiss than a real one, careful and measured, and yet desperate. A strong, gut-wrenching terror kicked into Harry's stomach, but he ignored it defiantly as he slid into mindlessness until all he felt was skin and teeth and wetness, and all he heard was their breaths and a soft moan that had to be his own. It ended too soon. Their lips parted as plainly as they had met, and Snape looked up at him for another long moment before drifting to sleep. The hand on Harry's neck crept on the sheets and stayed there. Harry's jeans were suddenly too tight. He allowed himself a moment of shock, and then a few more moments of smiling like the idiot Snape always accused him of being. Then he got up, promising himself that the panic would come later. He tucked Snape with a blanket and loosened another button on his shirt just in case before fleeing the room. He suddenly knew what was missing with Joe. Severus woke up in the middle of the night, sliding off his coat to sink better into the comfort of his bed. The window curtains had been pulled open. How absurd, he never opened the curtains. And he knew that he should remember something. Something should have frightened him to his death by now. The moon looked like melted mozzarella to his bleary vision. Was he tired, intoxicated, and in love? Or was he sober, asleep, and alone? His lips tingled with something, like the memory of a nice kiss. The prostitutes never kissed him, and the curtains were never opened. He couldn't decide whether he should stick to this awakening or just let the comforting sensation of unforeseen peace lull him into sweet oblivion. One thing was for sure, there had been pain in him, too much pain, and now that pain had left with the suddenness of lightning. The mozzarella cheese was swallowed whole by a thick cloud of smoke, and it was surely the smoke of a well-baked Italian pizza with grilled ham and fresh warm tomato on top. He sniffed the air in expectation and almost smelled it there, with the crust yeast and the peppers and the garlic pork and the happiness. Oh, the happiness.